Welcome to Bled Talk, where language barriers are shattered and aspirations take flight. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, here to ignite your English journey. Each week, join us for captivating conversations between native speakers, unraveling the secrets of vocabulary and expressions through authentic stories and natural dialogue. Let's empower your language skills and embrace the power of communication. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back, everybody, to the second part with Jackie. We had a great conversation in the first episode, and I'm extremely excited for the second part as well, because the first part was a really good base. It helped us really understand where she came from and who she is, and now we're gonna see how did she get to where she is now. So Jackie, let's kind of get into that, right? Last time we talked, you told us that you started to teach English. You had your first child, and you'd just gotten married, and you were barely making ends meet. So how did you grow? How did you move forward?
I'd say little by little, lots of little baby steps. And this is often like the way that people don't want to do. A lot of times people I want the big success, fame, money, right away. So I'm going to do something really big, really risky, because they want to skip all the little steps in between, which can work. Sometimes that'll work out really well. But for me, at least, I felt safer just kind of focusing like, okay, well, what's one simple thing I can do right now that's like attainable and not putting the whole family in risk. And we started out really small. So we were living in a small apartment in Campinas, and I was teaching privately, and then we started putting together groups of students. It was hard because my husband would work during the day. So sometimes during the day I would teach privately with my son. Luckily, I had really nice students who were patient. But then I would wait for him to get home, and then I would teach groups in our apartment, and he would stay with our son. And then once the groups were full, we looked into renting out like a space. And I always had it, like I always felt like I had a school even before I actually had a school, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times when we envision something for ourselves, it's almost like, okay, imagine like you have it now, like just feel it and just act like you have it now, and eventually you will end up having it. It's kind of like the secret to what people say is like manifestation. It's not just put it on your vision board and then expect it to come to you. That is not how anything works. It's like, if I want this result, I need to become the person that gets that result. So, and this applies to everything. Like if you want to learn English or become a fluent English speaker, it's not just you wish for it and wait for it to come to you. It's like, no, well, what does a person who speaks English fluently do? And then start doing those things every single day, and then you end up becoming a person with that result. So for me, I'm like, I wanted to have an English school. And to be honest, the school that I took Portuguese classes at in Chicago, which was called Brazil in Chicago, that was like a really cool example for me because it was really small. It was one guy who was the owner. He was also the teacher. I just loved like the whole vibe of it. It was just really cozy and fun. So I had like that example. So it's always, again, it's really helpful to kind of have a model, have an example of something that you want, and it's never going to end up being the same. It's obviously going to be very different. But we rented out one room. It was above like a fruit and vegetable market, a Hortifruti Fartura, one of those little markets. And I just remember telling people like, I have a school, come to my school. And it was just me in one room at first, but eventually it grew. And as it grew, we rented out other rooms, we hired other teachers. And then over time, we left there and we rented out like it was a house. It was like an 8-room house with with like 10 parking spots. in front of it. But we just grew gradually, which was great because we were never in tremendous debt. We were never in any debt. It's just like, okay, we can't handle the number of students we have. Let's now rent out another room, or let's now hire another teacher.
You never were like, let's spend a lot of money and then make money after. It was like, let's do what we can, and then when the time comes, we'll add, like you said, little by little. It's not, you weren't like, all right, let's drop 500,000 reais on a big building and pay for all these new equipment and things. And a lot of what people think is what you have to do to start a school. They're like, oh, with a small deposit of 200,000 reais, you can open your own franchise and this and that. And it's not always that. It doesn't have to be like that. You don't always need to go.
Right. And I do think for us, like, we didn't have that option. Like, we didn't have any extra money to invest. So I think that path to me can sometimes take longer, which some people, they want the results right away, but it also gives you time to just learn along the way, because there's so many things that you do, and then you realize, like, oh, maybe this wasn't the best way to do it. I want to make changes. And it's just slow and steady, but I don't think you're ruining your reputation along the way, because you're constantly improving throughout that period of time as well, which is better. If I had done something really big my first year, it may have been a disaster, because I didn't have those years of growing slowly and learning from my mistakes and improving along the way. But that was how we started our school, which was called Cia de Inglês, Companhia de Inglês. We did sell it before we moved back to the US, but the owner, he was a former teacher of ours and then coordinator, and it's still open now only for Skype classes, private classes via Skype. But I knew that I wanted to move to the online world, especially when I was pregnant with our second son. I loved living in Brazil. We had a really good life there. But for me, as like the type of person that I am, I wanted freedom to kind of go wherever we wanted to go. And when you have a physical location, like a physical business, it's really hard to have that freedom, because you have to be there. You can't just, I'm going to the United States for a month and leave you guys behind, unless you hire people to run the show. But for me, I really wanted that like digital business that we could kind of do anywhere. So that became like my obsession. And I remember seeing other YouTube channels and seeing people selling courses, and I was like, okay, if they're doing it, maybe I can do this too. And again, it's like a whole new learning curve. I didn't know anything about social media or YouTube or how to edit videos or all of this stuff. It's a completely different world than, going to an actual school and teaching a group of people that are there in person. But, little by little, we start learning, just like you know this too, Sam. You test things out, and it's a bit embarrassing because it's very public. And I think that's what's difficult about it. You may post a video and it's not your best work because it's the first video you've ever done, and everyone can see it, which is hard and challenging. But you get better as you go. And through that, just when you become more visible, a lot more opportunities can come to you, just like we were talking about how we met. I was tagged in one of your reels on Instagram, and I saw that you followed me, and I sent you a message saying I like your work. And it's just, if you're not visible, you're just limiting yourself. And you want to be able to show people like who you are, what you do, what your work is like. And then you never know what can happen from that. Like, it's just put yourself out there, have a general idea of what you want. Like for me, I wanted to create an online course. Like I was very clear, but I had to create an online presence in order to attract people online. Like no one's going to buy a course from me if they don't know who I am or
Right.
what I do.
Well, and yeah, and that's something I've learned as well is that, especially I don't know why, but a lot of my students they work in marketing a lot, and we talk about this, and they tell me, they say, even, I know your course is great and it's very good, but even if you don't have a good course, you can still sell your course really well if you have good marketing. And like you said, if you don't have that online presence, if you don't have the credibility, if you don't have all of these things that you need to do in order to sell something, you're not going to sell a lot. It's just like, I don't know. It's just like, for example, ketchup. If Heinz has their specific ketchup that everybody likes, everybody buys it, and it's because they kind of they built a presence, right? They've done all of the advertising that they need to do. They've been in the right places at the right times, and they have that. And there might be a really good ketchup somewhere else in the world that we don't know about because
Mhm.
they didn't do that. And so I
True.
think I agree with you. I think it's important that you become noticed, like you said, to be visible. You're not can't be a ghost. You have to be someone who everybody sees, and they have to
Yeah.
see you a lot.
But I think the marketing, I do think you can sell a bad product with good marketing for a short period of time. If you
Right.
want longevity, if you want to be around, you have to be good.
Yeah.
I think eventually people will catch on. And nowadays consumers are just smarter. People
Hmm.
don't fall for stuff that they used to fall for in the past. And it's a very different market now than it was even, 6 years ago when I first started selling my course. And if for me, like I know I have to improve. I can't just be the same Jackie from 6 years ago and expect people to keep watching my content and buying my products. I have to give them something better all the time. And I like that because it's like pushing me to
Hmm.
keep learning and keep delivering and I want to sell something that I think is better than it
Yeah.
was a few years ago. And it's hard because we're hard on ourselves. We know no matter what we do, it could always be better.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think there's a lot of stuff available nowadays, and there are a lot of, marketing agencies and things like that will try to convince you like, hey, it's super easy to sell if, we know all these strategies and that is important. But I think I could be wrong, but I think what's more important is how you connect, how you make people feel when they're watching your videos or when they're using, learning English with your content. People tend to buy based on emotion versus
Hmm.
just oh, look at this discount I could
Right.
get, and that's also your reputation, like when you are the brand, you don't want to just sell some garbage course, like that's like
Yeah.
your reputation. It's not just like a ketchup brand. Like there's no person behind it. And even if the ketchup was really bad, eventually people would catch on and be like, I don't care how amazing that marketing is. I'm not
Right.
buying that ketchup anymore.
Well, and yeah,
Um,
and like you said, like for example, the ketchup has the brand, and obviously anybody who makes ketchup is going to make other condiments and
yeah,
other things, and if one thing is bad, then everything else that they do is also bad, like you said, because
yes,
we've talked about it, because I've had that where people have came to me and said, "Oh, we'll sell a course," and I was like, "I don't have a course exactly, not one that I want to put out yet," and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't need to be good," and I'm like, "But it does. It needs to be good," and I think that might just be something that we're raised with. I know we talked a little bit about that before, but like at least where I'm from, we want to put something good out. I remember my grandpa. He's the kind of guy that if he's going to do something, he wants to be the best at it. If he's going to do a job for you, he wasn't going to leave until the job was done correctly. And
Right.
and I think that's something that I have with me, and I've had with me forever, is that, I tell my students, I say, I'm not going to give you a class that's mediocre. I'm gonna try and give you the best that I can, because I think that's what you deserve. I think people deserve the best that you can give them, and I don't think they deserve any less.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I agree.
I agree with you. I think that if, you know, can you sell a bad course and make money for a couple months? Sure, but as soon as the what do you call them in English? The reviews, yeah. As soon
Yeah.
as the reviews come in, as soon as people start commenting on your things, you can be over very quickly if it's not good.
Right. And to me, it'd just be like it wouldn't be worth the stress, like I wouldn't I personally I don't think I could sleep at night feeling like I have all these people that are angry or feeling ripped off. Or to me, I'm like, if you don't like my course, take your money back. I give people a 30-day guarantee, which is the biggest guarantee I can possibly give them with the platform that we use, and they get tons of content that they can test it out. And I say, if you don't like it, it's okay. Like, I promise I will not be offended. I will be happy to give you your money back rather than have someone who's unhappy with their purchase. And to me, it just doesn't, it's not worth it. Like, I'd rather have happy people rather than like extra money in my bank account. But it is hard because we need to sell, it kind of like sometimes you feel yourself getting pulled in those directions where you get kind of focused on, no, the numbers and this and that. And um I guess now what I'm just grateful for, I'm at a point where like financially I'm comfortable and I'm okay. Like I want to sell. I want to have a good, a
Yeah,
successful business,
obviously, yeah.
but I don't really care about having like the most number of students or having double the sales that I had last year. I mean, I care honestly more about my team because I want them to do well.
Right. You want to
But
give them a better thing.
yeah, it's it's not that big of a deal. And I do think sometimes, like especially as teachers and content creators, it's easy to get like sucked into that. And then you forget like what am I here for?
Right.
Like I'm actually here to teach and to have fun and hopefully inspire other people to have
Right.
fun along this journey. And that is more important. Like the journey is way more important than the final result. Like, and if you're having
Mhm.
fun and if you're learning and you're growing, like that's it. Like you've made it.
Yeah.
You're doing awesome.
And it's like, I think we've talked about a little bit about this before, but it really comes down to who you are, and
Yeah.
you have to remember who you are. You have to show who you are as well. My wife, she has a friend who her dream is to be an influencer on Instagram and TikTok and all of these things. And she's the person that she won't post a video unless the video is perfect. It's the way that she
Hmm.
wants it to be. And she has another friend who is pretty successful. She has a makeup channel and all of these things, and she has a lot of followers. She gets paid through her YouTube as well. And what happened was, is she told this other friend, she said, look, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you. People need
Yeah.
to see you. And I think that's what a lot of, especially a lot of English teachers, because that's what I see the most on Instagram. By default, as an English teacher, you end up seeing a lot of other advertisements and things for other teachers, and I think that's where a lot of people have difficulty, is just being who they are.
Yeah.
It's important to show you and be you, because like you said before, people they buy with emotions. And when you're
Hmm.
you and somebody likes you for who you are, then it's just like your friends. Your friends, they're going to be more faithful to you than they are another stranger, because
Right.
they like you and you like them. And so I think that's important. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think what's tricky is some people don't know who they are and they don't know exactly what the reason is, for going online. And I think some people are seeking out approval from others, and that can be a really slippery slope. Because when you go online and you're very visible and you're insecure and you're seeking out approval and or you're seeking out validation, it can really destroy a person,
Yeah.
because you're gonna get a lot of people that are gonna sense that energy, and they're gonna tell you who you should be and tell you what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing and tell you what's wrong with you and what's right with you. And then it just pulls you further and further away from who you truly are. But that's why it's hard. Like I worry about like young kids and things like that. Even for me at my age, I'm like, it's a weird place to be in sometimes when you're
Because
so like
well, 'cause
visible and
and sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget who we are, and we let those things kind of attack us. Even people who have been doing it for a long time. I'm
yeah,
sure that there's days that all of the big names, they have days that they just want to curl up in a ball, and they don't want to post, they don't want to talk to anybody because they let it attack them. And then I think that's normal, that's human. We're social beings, and so sometimes we have those interactions. But and I think that also, you were talking about your team a little bit, and kind of having people who support you, and taking care of them. And I think that for me, that's one thing that helps me remember who I am, is that I have people who are with me. And I think, not being all lovey-dovey, but my wife is always number one supporter, and that helps. It helps a lot, because there's
oh
days
yeah,
that to me, I'm like, I don't like what I said. I don't like what this person said. I'm like, is that really what I am to people? Do people really see me? Is that? And she's the first person to say no. Don't
yeah,
worry about them. Don't listen to them. And
yeah,
and it's important. It's important to have that support.
absolutely. And I no, I agree. You need people that are with you because they love you for who you are and not just, what you can offer them. And I do think, over time we do become more resilient just because you know who you are. So if you get a comment, you can think about maybe there is something
Hmm.
constructive in it,
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe I did say something that was offensive and I didn't even know, or whatever. You can reflect on it. Um, but if you don't agree with it, if you're like, no, this is just an angry person wanting to make
Right.
other people feel
They
bad on the
they
internet,
right. They had a
it's
bad
not
day.
for me.
They won.
Yeah. And you just become more like like, yeah, it's like you're wearing like repellent. And I think people won't even say anything anymore because they know it doesn't
Yeah.
hurt you.
And
It's
you
like
have that.
bullies in
Yeah.
school.
You have
Like if bullies
100% deed on, and nobody's going to touch you.
exactly. And like if a bully senses that whatever he or she is doing to this kid is hurting that kid, they're going to keep doing it. But if the kid's like, I don't care what you say or do, like then they lose
It's up.
interest.
Well,
Then they try to find somebody else. But a lot of it is just our own self-confidence. We have to have a really good level, and not like an ego, like, oh, I'm the best person in the world at all. It's like I am a human. I may not be for everybody, and that's okay. Like I know I'm doing my best. I like
yeah.
who I am. I'm always trying.
Yeah.
That's all right.
I always tell people that I say I do my best to think. I have a thought that I use that helps to try and not be cocky, but also, be happy and confident in who I am. And I always say that I know that I am the best English teacher that I can be. I'm the
Yes.
best. I'm the best me that there is. And at first it sounds cocky, but then if you think about it, I'm the best me. Who you are, that's you. But
Yeah.
I know that who I am, there's at the moment, and there's never been a better version of who I am today. And so I think, I try to use that thought a lot when people say things, or if they, because the thing is like you said, if you have that energy of like, oh, I don't know who I am, what I'm doing, people sense that, and they tell you
Mhm.
who they think you are. But if you have that, if you carry around that dignity, you know, that confidence, people see that and they respect you. And then the comments kind of become a lot more positive
Right.
than negative.
Right.
And
Yeah.
even if somebody does criticize you, they do it in a more respectful way.
Yes.
That's something I've noticed as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if they don't click with you, it's okay too. It's not going to ruin your day.
Right.
Like, it's all right. I don't expect, you're not going to please everybody.
Right.
So and that's perfectly fine.
But, you know, and something that's good is to remember is that, you know, I think every one person that complains, there's 99 others. There's 200 other people that loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important to remember is that, you know, you might not get everybody, but almost everybody is still, I think it's good enough.
Yeah. If you're
And
helping somebody, it's okay.
exactly. Yeah. And speaking of help, so, you know, obviously, like you've been teaching for a lot longer than I have, and you have a lot of good experience, I would say. And like you said, you've had mistakes that have happened. You've had things that have really built who you are today and how you teach. And as somebody who's learned Spanish, who's learned Portuguese, who's taught English for I don't how many years have you taught English now, would you say?
Mm,
You don't have to be super specific, but
almost 15. 15.
look at that, 15
Yeah.
years.
Actually, if
Um,
it would be more than that, if you can. There was a
it,
period of time where I
if
was
you
like
count the other,
volunteering.
yeah,
Yeah,
if
15
you count
plus.
the other, yeah, 15 or more. But with all of that experience, what would you say? Let's say we have somebody who's just starting out. What could you tell them that would help them improve? What's something you would tell them in order to start learning English and to stay dedicated to it?
Um, I typically like the method that I describe is I think we need to think of a scale. Okay. So on one side of the scale, you actually have to study. I know some people, they're like, oh, I want to learn English through osmosis. I'm just going to
Right.
sleep.
I'm gonna drink
Or,
water, and it's gonna be okay.
you do have to study, but studying can be done in a lot of different ways.
Oh,
It doesn't mean like memorizing the dictionary by any means. There's a lot of different ways to study. You can study with Netflix and music and fun stuff too. But we do have to study grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, phrasal verbs are used a lot in English too. So that is definitely like one side of the scale. And there are lots of ways that we can learn and can study for quicker results and for longer retention. But I won't go into too many details with that here. But the other side of the scale is input and output. So basically, comprehensible input is content that you listen to and that you can understand. I'd say at least 70%. So if you're listening to something that you don't understand, even 50% of it, you'll probably get really tired and just stop paying attention. So it's good to look for content that is at your level or ideally a little bit above your level.
mm-hmm.
So, and this has been like proven, like
Right.
comprehensible input is like the number one thing that helps people learn English faster out of like everything. So just a lot of listening. And what ends up happening is when we listen to English and we're actually paying attention and we're understanding most of it, when we want to speak, we know what sounds right. So how we traditionally learn, like in schools, is straight from the book, memorizing verb conjugations and filling out exercises and taking tests, which is fine,
Right.
but it doesn't really help you communicate. Because when it's time for you to speak, you usually have to stop and think, like, oh, wait, what's the verb conjugation? Do I use make or do here? There's just a lot of like steps that you have to go through before you can actually speak. But when you have a lot of comprehensible input, you can say something because you've heard it before or you just know that it sounds okay. And the other part of that is also output, which is just speaking practice, which can be done just reading out loud, listening and repeating, just talking with other people, recording your voice, narrating whatever you do throughout the day. Just all of that, like, really is what's the most important. And what I see is some people, they're either like the scale is not balanced. So
Right.
there's usually like they've been studying for, 20 years and they know a lot of words, they know how to conjugate everything correctly and they get really, really good grades, but they can't speak. Or they can, when they try to speak, they freeze and don't know what to say. Or the other side, people who maybe have been immersed in the language, who live in the US or work in the US, but they never formally studied, they can speak and they can understand, but they make a lot of simple mistakes. So if you want to speak well, you got to have your scale balanced. So it's just kind of to me, it's just like a helpful visual to kind of figure out like, okay, well, what have I been doing a lot of? Maybe I need to do a little bit more on that other side to speak better or to not have to stop and think every time I talk.
No, definitely. I completely agree with you. I was in a course that it's called it's like teaching English as a second language certificate.
Yeah, I did that too.
It's a great course. I think it's wonderful. And that's, they talked a lot about not a theory, but the four main things, right? We always talk about speaking, listening, writing, and reading, and all those things. And they had talked about something that I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, which was, listening is input and speaking is the output of listening, right? And then reading is the input of writing as the output. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
and then it clicked with me, and I was like, oh, so if I listen a lot, then I should be able to speak a lot. Now, and I tell my students this a lot as well, that when I speak in Portuguese, it sounds like I can speak just as well as I can listen. But I always tell them, I'm like, I can listen a lot better than I
Hmm.
can speak. I was like, as much as you may not think that, for me, it's true.
Yeah,
If
me
somebody
too.
talks to me, there's a lot of stuff that I understand. And they say it the right way, it sounds good, it's beautiful. And then if I try to say the same exact thing, it's not going to come out the same way. And
Hmm.
though I feel very confident in speaking and I feel like I can really say anything that I need to say, I can still listen more. But that's why I listen even more, because the more that I listen, the more I'm going to speak. Same with
Hmm.
reading, right? If I can read a lot of things in Portuguese and it all makes sense. But
Yeah,
when it comes time to write in Portuguese, my goodness, it is
it's hard.
different. It's completely different.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's one of those things, if I read more, then I'm able to write more. And
exactly.
so I agree with you. And that's why I tell so many people when, the big question, and this is one that I'm going to ask you too, is that, you know, people, they always come to me and they're like, oh, I'm intermediate, but like, I just don't feel fluent. Like, what is fluent English? And I tell people, I was like, well, if you go to Cambridge and you go to all of these other places that have their official tests and things, somebody who's fluent is somebody who can have a good, can speak well, can communicate what they're feeling and what they need. Somebody who can hear everything and understand, without a lot of difficulties. Somebody who can read well, and somebody who can write with little grammatical errors, and a lot of people hear that and they're like, really? That's it? And because a lot of times when we hear fluent, we think of speaking, but I think
Yeah, and I think
fluency has
what's
to do with all of them.
yeah, and I like that you brought this up because I do feel like fluent, according to, like you said, like Cambridge definition, and fluent in our everyday English, they're like two different definitions.
Yeah.
Because I mean, someone with like a B2 level would be considered fluent, I guess,
Hmm.
according to the guidelines. But if you were to talk to a person in the US that had a B2 level, like no one would say, oh, that person is fluent. So there
Right.
is like that disconnect. To me, and I understand there's both. Like fluent is being able to have a fluid conversation without having to stop and think and minimal mistakes and stuff like that. But I do think in everyday English, when we're not talking about like teaching and, level B2, C1, that type of stuff, if someone were to put like fluent English on their resume, or if someone came to the US and another person said, wow, your English is fluent, that's like native level, almost native. So I do think that's important to note because there are like those two kind of like contrasting definitions. And I think when people say, I want to be fluent, they don't want to be necessarily like
Fluent,
native
fluent.
level.
Right.
They just want to be able to speak in a way that they don't have to stop and think, maybe kind of like you and I speak Portuguese. Like you speak Portuguese better than I do. But I'm like, I make some mistakes. I have an accent. I'm obviously not a native Portuguese speaker, but I can easily have a conversation
Right.
and with some minimal mistakes, and I can talk about a lot of different topics. So in that situation, yes, I would say I am fluent in Portuguese, but
Yeah.
my level is probably much higher than like a B1, B2 equivalent level.
Hmm.
So it is weird. Like that word fluent is such a general term.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I
Tricky.
like to, like I told you before, I was a weird child and I liked to look at words, and I was the kind of person that like if I saw that the word came from Greek or Latin or something, I was like, oh, well then what does the word mean in that? And
Yeah.
doing that, and I think also because I have a religious background when it comes to learning things, that's in religion you have to understand what each of the words really do mean, because if you don't, then it can be really complicated. And I like to look at fluent, and then you look at the other versions of fluent, right? Which like fluid, right? Like some type of,
Mm-hmm.
it means that something flows. And
Right.
so when we say fluent, like you said, there's different definitions and different things. But I think if you can flow with your language, right? If you can go from point A to point B, you can communicate, and there's no problem, right? There's no barricade. No beavers have built a dam in your little river of speaking. Then
Mm-hmm.
you're fluent.
Yeah.
It's okay to be fluent and not be perfect, right? And there's a reason why the two words are different. And so
Mm-hmm.
um,
It's
I
true.
I agree with you. I think that people when they come to me and they're like, "Oh, I want to be fluent," or people who come and they say, I I really don't want to have an accent anymore. But another thing that I always tell them, I'm like, "Look, I have an accent in Portuguese, and
And in
you,
English,
that was it, and I have one in English." I was like, I have a thick Midwest accent.
Sounds perfect to me.
Yeah, but say for you, it sounds like I don't have an accent. But if we were to talk to somebody from Alabama, somebody from Tennessee, then you're like, oh yeah, they're not from here. And
Right.
and I tell people, I was like, but there's a difference between accent and grammar. I was like, there are grammatical things that you have to understand, that you have to say, because an accent isn't going to make a word sound like a different word.
Right.
It, an accent is just going to change how you say it, the way you say it, whereas your grammar is going to be the actual word that you want to say, the word order, and those kind of things. And so I always tell people, I was like, we can work on your word order, your grammar, so that you speak well,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to tell you that you will sound American after you learn English, because no one really cares about the accent, honestly. No, I've never met anyone who's like, oh, I wish that they wouldn't have an accent. No,
No, no.
we all have accents. I think going back to the fluent part, being able to flow with what you say, I think that's enough.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of it is just, we always want to keep improving. So even if you do have a fluent level of English or Portuguese or whatever, it's not like, oh, I arrived at this level. Now I can stop. It's you have to
Mm.
continually keep
Uh-huh.
getting better and better and better. And if we if you don't use it, you will lose it. So we have to always make sure that we're using the language that we're learning, or we will lose it a little bit. It can be recovered. But, and like what you said about accent, your accent just tells people where you're from. So, when I speak in Portuguese, people probably can guess that I'm from the US or some other English-speaking country. And when I speak English, people probably assume I'm from the Midwest or Chicago area as well. So all it does, it's part of like your identity and tells people where you're from. Your pronunciation is something different though, because there are words that people mispronounce that has nothing to do with your accent. And, when I was learning Portuguese, for example, I would say acai instead of açaí. Well, that's not an accent error. Right. That's a pronunciation error.
You're just saying the word wrong. It's different.
Yeah, it wasn't my accent. I had the wrong pronunciation here. So we want to focus on having correct pronunciation so that we can be understood. And our accent, I do think what ends up happening, if you spend a lot of time in like a certain region or with certain people who speak a certain way, that accent will rub off on you. So, I mean, for example, I speak Portuguese with a foreigner accent, but people probably can assume that I learned Portuguese in the Sao Paulo, Campinas region, not Rio, not the South, not Bahia. It doesn't mean that I have like a Sao Paulo accent, but it's more that region than other regions of Brazil.
No, definitely. I agree because it's interesting because the way that I talk in Portuguese, a lot of people, they get confused because I learned Portuguese in São Paulo as well. But I learned it like in the center of São Paulo. So, like hardcore Paulista kind of accent. And they do speak different. My wife, she's from the north. And so that's a whole new can of worms that I had to understand how they speak. But the thing is like, for example, in São Paulo, they use a lot of você. And in the north, they use a lot of tu. And so now when I talk, I don't use a lot of você. I use a lot of tu. And also now that I live in Curitiba, there's a whole new accent.
It's true.
And so there's so many different influences that kind of create, well, like you said, it's all about your accent just shows where you're from. It doesn't show that you don't know how to talk. It just shows that you are from somewhere and that you're a person that learned in a specific place.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, and I think that's all I have for us for this part. And I really hope that we get to have another chance to talk and we get to have more opportunities. And I'm sure that the people, like I said, like I told you before, I'm a huge fan of what you do, and my students are also huge fans of what you do.
Well,
and so I'm sure they'll love it. They'll love to hear it, and I'm going to listen to it again. I know I will. And like I said, for everybody who's listening, I think Jackie has a great story, and it's a wonderful opportunity to get to know people and get to know. It's wonderful to just meet people in general, but when you meet somebody that has a story that can really help you move forward in your life, I think that there's no price you can pay for that. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Jackie, for participating. Thank you for coming on the show, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam, and I think you're doing amazing work as well. I've already told you that, but you really are. So keep up the amazing work, and
I appreciate it.
I really admire what you're doing as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, everybody have a wonderful day. Have a good night, depending on what time you're listening. Great. And we'll see you next time on Bled Talk. Stay safe, and we'll catch you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Bled Talk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast,